It's more about how frequent the grammar issues are and how inaccurate the grammar is. So you can have grammar mistakes, but if the examiner can still understand what you're writing, it doesn't mean that you're going to fall below a 6.
Halo Icon Folks, kembali lagi bersama saya Tommy di Icon Podcast. Nah teman-teman, kali ini saya sudah kedatangan tamu dari University of Western England, UK di Bristol. Ya, jadi kita akan ngobrol sedikit teman-teman tentang ujian masuknya, tantangannya, ya, dan juga kita akan bicara tentang pengalaman berkuliah di sana. Jadi stay tune teman-teman.
Before we start, can you introduce yourself and what do you do at UWE Bristol?
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm with UWE International Educational Services. We have a big team out here for the Asia Pacific region. And among other things, I'm part of a testing team for UWE Bristol. And we actually test many international applicants trying to go to UWE from not only Asia Pacific, but all over the world. And so we process a lot of tests every year, and we also teach IELTS skills, and I also function as an examiner on that test as well. So sort of all around. And our test, called the UWE EPT, it's very similar to the IELTS. In fact, it's modeled directly after the IELTS. It looks like the IELTS. Students need to apply the same skills, and it's evaluated the same as the IELTS test. Yeah.
And are these tests free for students?
They are free. Yep. Students can take the UE test for free, at least the first one. If you don't get the band score that you need and need to retake it, there is a small fee for a resit, but the first time is always free, and I think that makes it more convenient than doing the IELTS for students that are hoping to come to UWE Bristol.
Right, okay. Now, what is the minimum score that UWE Bristol will accept?
So for undergrad, most courses need an overall band 6, minimum of band 6, with no score in any component lower than a band 5.5. Right. So reading, writing, listening, and speaking, none of those can be below band 5.5. For students applying to the postgrad program, it needs to be a minimum of band 6.5 with no component below 5.5 again. And there's certain courses, such as nursing, for example, where some components may need to have a slightly higher band score, just based on the needs of those courses.
Right, okay. Now, I'm pretty sure that our viewers will be a bit curious. We're talking about 5.5, 6, right? But can you tell us a little bit, like, for example, what a level of student that can get 5.5 or 6, for example? Can you explain a little bit about it?
What that looks like or sounds like when we're looking at their papers? That's right. All right. Well, in terms of, I think it's easiest to talk about the productive skills of writing and speaking.
Yes.
All right. So a student that can get a band 6 in writing for their essay, and remember, this is 6 out of 9, right? So it doesn't mean you have to have a perfect essay. But what the examiner does need to see is that the student has understood the task, which means the student does need to read that task carefully to know what's being asked of them, and that they have at least partially fulfilled the task or made an attempt to fulfill all of it. However, if the essay goes off topic, unfortunately we have a problem and the essay falls below a 6. So we want to see a nice task achievement score to show that the student has understood that. Examiners want to see paragraphing. One issue that a lot of students make is they write a big block of text and forget to use paragraphs. So the examiner needs to see that the student has really thought out their essay and and that they're dividing up their ideas throughout it, right, in a way that's easy to read and understand their argument. Then, of course, we get to the lexical components and the grammatical components. You can still get a 6 with grammar problems in your essay. It's more about how frequent the grammar issues are and how inaccurate the grammar is. So you can have grammar mistakes, but if the examiner can still understand what you're writing, it doesn't mean that you're going to fall below a 6, right? But sometimes grammar and punctuation mistakes start to make it really difficult to read, and that's where the score has a risk of falling below 6. In terms of the lexis or the vocabulary, What examiners want to see at a band 6 level or up is that there's a nice variety of vocabulary. So that means you're not relying on the same words again and again. You're using some more complex words in your writing, or you're at least attempting more complex words, but with varying degrees of accuracy.
Okay, all right. So to recap, that means in order for them to get a band 6, that means they need to understand the question, and then also they need to be able to at least address that question.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
The relevant answer.
With a relevant
Even though
answer.
there are some mistakes, right? There are some errors in the grammar vocabulary, they will still be fine as long as it is still understandable.
Yes.
You can still understand it.
Yeah, it needs to be intelligible, right?
Yes.
Now, of course, there's a lot of details that come down to what kind of grammar mistakes, the amount and lexical resource, what kind of vocabulary and wording is being used that comes into the examiner's consideration. But if it's an easy to understand essay, meaning the examiner can understand your argument, you have organized your ideas well, then you start to stand a pretty good chance of achieving at least band 5.5 or 6, right? That's what we want to be over band 5.5, because to get into an undergrad program, you don't want to have any component below band 5.5.
Okay, all right. Now, Zach, let's talk about the common errors, the common mistakes that students often make.
Sure.
So can you tell me more about the common mistakes that they often make?
Yeah. Any particular skill you'd like to focus on?
Skills.
Yeah, okay. I can talk a little bit about all of them, actually, but I'll try to be fairly brief with each of them. So for writing, let's start with writing, because that's what we were just talking about. For writing, one of the big issues that students make is not reading the task carefully enough. So they start to write an answer, which may be very well written, but they're not actually answering the question or the instruction that was given to them in a task. So for example, for an advantages and disadvantages essay, which is a very common essay type, sometimes students will just write the advantages because they feel, oh, I think this is a great thing. Here's all the advantages. And then they completely miss the other half of the task to write disadvantages. And no matter how well they've written it, that's going to take a big chunk out of their possible score. So reading the task. Similarly to that, planning your essay is really critical. So one mistake that students make on writing is they're kind of panicking because there's not much time to write. And so they sit down, they read the task, and they just begin writing their essay immediately. The better thing to do here is to plan the structure of your essay first. What is your thesis statement, your main idea? What are your topic sentences? So for example, what is each body paragraph going to be about? Try to figure those things out before you start writing, and that way you know by the time you finish writing, your essay will still make sense after you've added all the details. Let's take a step back now and go to listening, which is the first component of the IELTS test. Really critical part on the listening test is that 30 seconds, or that little bit of time you get before you hear the recording, to look ahead at the questions that you have, right? And this time needs to be utilized properly because it's the only chance you get to see questions before you actually start hearing the audio. And remember, on the listening, you only hear the recording once. So students make the mistake of not using that time to get a good understanding of the text of those questions. What are the questions about? And making some predictions about what kinds of answers they may hear. And that can be something simple by, for example, if you're filling in a gap and you need to listen to the recording for the answer, the students need to try to predict, are they going to hear a noun? And would it be maybe a number, a name, a place? Or are they going to hear a verb or an adjective? Usually we can determine what part of speech is going to be for that answer, right? Before we hear the recording, that helps us listen out for those answers. If we haven't done any of that predicting, then unfortunately, students are trying to quickly read the questions as they're listening, and usually that's not enough time to catch the answer when it's spoken. Reading. A mistake that students make with reading quite often is reading too much for detail before looking at the questions. So they see the reading passage and they waste too much time trying to read that big 700 or 800 word passage. The best approach is to go to the questions first, and then there are some techniques students can use. The biggest ones are skimming and scanning. Skimming means that you just read perhaps the first and last sentence of a paragraph to get an understanding of what is in that paragraph. That will help you when you get to the questions for reading to identify what part of the reading passage the answers are in, right? So you can quickly identify it, and that prevents you from needing to read the whole passage again and again for detail because you simply don't have time for that on the reading test. Similarly, scanning is a really important skill. Whether you're scanning for a number or a name, quickly looking through the test just to find that identifying information, and then reading for detail, just a few sentences, that can help you find the answer quickly. So just keep in mind, everyone who's listening, if you're thinking about doing the test, on the reading test, there's no need to read the entire reading passage in detail. Find the answers based on what you need to look for using skimming and scanning techniques. Otherwise, unfortunately, you'll run out of time. And I wouldn't call this a mistake for speaking, but the biggest issue I think students have with speaking is just being nervous, and that's totally natural. It's scary to be sitting in front of an examiner and needing to talk and knowing that they're judging you, right? Anyone would be nervous in that situation. So taking some deep breaths, right? Remembering how many times you've practiced and that you're ready for this, right? And also speaking the right amount of length, right? So for part 1, try to keep it between 2 and 4 sentences for your answers. Remember when you get to part 2, it's the long turn. So you have a maximum of 2 minutes to speak, but ideally aim for at least a minute and a half. A problem that students have here is they don't write enough notes, so they don't have enough to say in part 2, and they run out of things to say before even a minute has passed. And unfortunately, the examiner hasn't listened to you enough now to give you maybe a fair mark. So you're probably a much better speaker than you think you are, but you haven't spoken for a long enough time for the examiner to know that. And same thing in part 3. Students get nervous, and sometimes their minds can kind of go blank when they get a part 3 question. Remember that your answers here need to sort of be paragraph length. You need to go a bit more in depth with your opinions, your thoughts, maybe comparing and contrasting different viewpoints. In that part 3, we need to have more than just 1 or 2 sentences for an answer. So, in summary, combination of being nervous to speak, that can make students choke up and not give as long an answer as they can. And also, don't be satisfied with leaving your answer too short. Try to keep on speaking. Show the examiner what a great speaker you are and your capability with the language.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Now, Zach, a lot of students also ask that, what if right now, let's say I take a prediction test, and I get 4.5 or I get a band 4.
Yeah.
In order for me to get to a band 6, how long do you think I will need? How much time do I need to invest in order for me to be able to get to a band 6?